This is the FM Gold channel of All India Radio. In the program News Analysis, now we bring you a dialogue on CAG Audit to private telecom companies. The participants are Sadhna Dikshit, former member Telecom Commission, and Prasoon Srivastava, Special Telecom Correspondent PTI.
High Court has allowed Comptroller and Auditor General of India to audit accounts of the private telecom companies. The matter was challenged before court by telecom industry representatives who have been saying that CAG can audit only government accounts. However, court has now allowed CAG to look into their books. Mrs. Sadhna Dikshit, what is the detail of this case, how it started, and you may have gone through order of High Court which was issued yesterday. So if you can help us understanding the whole issue.
I have had the opportunity to just go through the order. I think we need to look at it once again. But what I could gather from the order is that they have relied on Article 149 of the Constitution. The division bench has relied on Article 149 of the Constitution and has authorized the CNAG to audit the books of accounts of the telecom service providers. Once the revenue share had been introduced in the telecom sector, way back in 1999. That was the first time when a revenue share had been introduced. And the licenses, because prior to that we had the fixed license fee regime in which a fixed amount had to be paid. But with the introduction of the revenue share regime, there was a need for examination of the books of accounts of the telecom service providers. Even at that stage, the CAG was not looking at their books of accounts. They wanted this introduction of examination of the books of accounts. A view at that point of time, there were contrary views, and a view was taken after much deliberation that while it is not a very healthy practice to have the CNAG looking at the books of private service providers, we should, since the revenues involved are significant, we should allow them, and therefore a suitable provision had been made in the maintenance of books of accounts, the regulations that had been prescribed by the TRAI under Article 5 of that regulation, for the CNAG to call for the books of accounts in order to ensure that the revenues that they were giving were properly accounted for. Since then, now this had come about somewhere in 2002. Since then, however, no audit of the private service providers as such had taken place. And it was only in January 2010 that for the first time that the CNAG started to ask for auditing the books of accounts of some of the private service providers.
What were the factors that you feel triggered CAG to ask for the books of private telecom companies?
Mainly, I would look at it is the special audit that was conducted by the department itself. And the department conducted the special audit of 5 service providers, which reflected that some of the revenues had not been accounted for correctly. They were not reflected in their submissions that the service providers had made. And therefore, it led to a belief by the CNAG possibly that large revenues were going unaccounted for. And they invoked the provision under Rule 5 of the maintenance of books of accounts for auditing the books of the private service providers.
What are the existing mechanisms to audit books? Based on our talks, I can understand that there are certain provisions that are already existing. Can you please elaborate on those?
The license agreement itself provides for auditing the books of accounts. There are 2 stages. One is the audit. Once the government realizes, the licensor realizes that the accounts have not been correctly reflected, it can order an audit. The audit is that by a chartered accountant, a statutory audit under the Companies Act, and not by the CAG.
Okay, it is a private chartered accountant?
These are empaneled by the CNAG. The auditors that we pick up are from a panel of auditors maintained by the CNAG. And over and above that audit, there is a special audit also that is provided under the license agreement. So in a way, there are sufficient provisions within the license agreement itself that should take care of the audit of the accounts. In addition to that, the CNAG also inspects the books of the government and the submissions made by the service providers to the government itself. So there are adequate mechanisms in place for the CNAG as well, instead of going directly to the private service providers, to go through the government route, to go through while examining the books, the submissions made to the government department, and thereafter call for more records or pass any judgment on filings made by the service providers.
So you already had some provision and you all picked up chartered accountants that were empaneled by CAG, and you also have your own auditors. If CAG goes for auditing books of telecom companies, what is the additional that they can do?
One good part of the judgment, in the judgment also they have cautioned that it should not be too intrusive. Now, and it should only restrict to the revenue aspect of it. There are certain things where the expenditures are set off. The order says that it should not look at the expenditure part of it. One difficulty could arise where certain set-offs from expenditures are not permitted. But if you are not looking at the expenditures, how do you see those? So it's a kind of a caution that is given to the CAG. But going by how the CAG conducts the audit, and once the level of people who do the audit, I think there is a strong need for one is capacity building. I personally feel that instead of making it more and more cumbersome, instead of making too many agencies inspecting the books of accounts and adding to the cost of running services, what should be that the existing systems need to be augmented, both in terms of manpower as well as in capacity building. That is absolutely necessary.
And there's one thing when companies pay you taxes or pay some kind of revenue share, then there's something called AGR and there's GR. So what is this GR and AGR? And I've heard that some of these matters are sub judice also. So till those things don't come up clean and clear, will CAG be able to audit these companies?
Insofar as the GR and AGR is concerned, that matter had been going on for a very, very long time.
GR would be
gross revenues and AGR is the adjusted gross revenue. And AGR is derived after making certain deductions from the gross revenue. And these are specified in each of the licenses. They basically, in terms of the universal access service licenses, they mean the calls that are made that are passed on, the roaming charges that are passed on, service tax which is passed on to the government, and the sales tax which is passed on to the government. That is all the deductions that are allowed from the gross revenues in order to arrive. Now this matter about the GR, AGR had been a contentious issue and it had been going on before the TD sat and thereafter before the Supreme Court. But we have got a judgment now and the Supreme Court has upheld the definition of the AGR which is there in the licenses.
You said sales and taxes also. So can CAG take route of income tax and sales declaration also to enter into books of private telecom companies?
They can. And in fact, I sometimes wonder also as to why it's only in the telecom sector that the CAG is looking at. Excise is a very big revenue. Income tax is a very big revenue. But in those two cases, again, as per my understanding, the CAG does not go in for the auditing the accounts of the private service providers.
Do you think the CAG has that much capacity as you are alarming that they have not looked into excise and other kind of accounts? So do you think they have capacity?
I would not also suggest that we should build up that capacity in terms of numbers. First is the numbers. Second is the capability in terms of training and in order to look at the books of accounts. It requires a specialized capability. But I would not suggest, you see, the government for a long time has been saying that we would like to be lean and thin. So we should not try to augment ourselves in terms of numbers as such for the purpose of auditing. For the basic function, yes. But for auditing purposes, I do not think we should go overboard for augmenting the numbers. And it should not be intrusive also. At the same time, as the order has also suggested to the private service providers that they should try to instill a measure of confidence. So the order is quite a balanced order and it tries to also tell the private service providers that they should build in the confidence. The government should have the confidence that they are submitting the accounts in a very fair manner. Creative accounting, as long as there are certain loops. So what we should try and do is, instead of increasing the policing part of it, make it simple, make it easy for them to make those submissions. As far as possible. Simple doesn't mean that it can be very, very extremely simple that one statement, just a small sheet could be presented for that. But as far as possible, simplify the presentations that have to be made. And I think increased policing they will still find some ways and means for, in case, wherever the businesses are not being run on sound footing and not in an honest way, they will find ways to circumvent. What we need to look at is how this translates into the cost both to the government as well as to the private service providers.
Do you think that this order will further deter investment sentiments in telecom sector? You have been interacting with players. They have been saying that there is too much of regulation in telecom industry. Now, this order further adds to another kind of watchdog onto their head.
Telecom is one area where, of course, there is a tremendous growth potential. A tremendous growth potential both in terms of numbers as well as in the kind of services that need to be provided. We already know that broadband is still around 14 million connections, whereas what we are aiming for in the telecom policy 2012 is a very ambitious program, both in terms of rural coverage as well as in the case of broadband. So there is a lot of scope over there. At the same time, what we saw how the market was hurt badly when the CNAG had indicted in the case of 2G. And they came out with those figures of 1,76,000 crores as one of the figures of presumptive loss. And we saw how the market sentiment was and what was the response to the auctions that came about. And how it translates into the cost. Because if we are looking at affordable tariffs, then we need to also see as to how do they bring in that money in order to make the tariffs affordable. They need to invest also. I must say it's not just the numbers alone that are important. It's the quality of service that is important. So for improved quality of service, they need to make investments. And for that investments, naturally, if they are to spend a huge amount only in complying to the enforcement of a regulation, be it either the regulator or the DOT or the CNAG, then I think the costs will go up.
And if you look at previous planning commission reports which have said that revenue should be secondary in telecom sector and reach should be the priority thing. But with these kind of orders coming in, don't you feel that government is looking for too much of revenue? If you see, Finance Ministry has also set certain target to meet fiscal deficit and garner revenue from spectrum auctions, spectrum sales. So government don't think has missed out the agenda of reaching out to masses and focusing more on revenues?
If you see the National Telecom Policy 2012, you would find that the government has focused on reaching out to the masses. And affordability also is another criteria. We are also talking about roaming all over India also. Lots of things have been talked about. So the government's focus is there on reaching out to the masses. Government is also talking about affordable telecom services. It's also seeing that telecom is one way of empowering the people. And I think that's a very, very strong message that the government is giving. And it's for a fact that what we have seen through the USO, some of the schemes that are being run as to how empowerment comes through the telecom services. And I think government is right in a way that the revenues need to be, what revenues have to come to the government, they should be properly accounted for. What this order also is trying to look at is that revenues that are due to the government are correctly coming to the government. That is what it tries to say.
Does this order further empower CAG to look into accounts of non-telecom companies also?
The order is with reference to the telecom sector, but it would have implications fallout on other sectors itself because it's talking about Article 149 of the Constitution of India.
Which means that a lot of other companies can also come under scanner of CNAG.
Yes. And maybe I think there would be a need to look at schemes which are working under the PPP mode, public-private partnership mode, where both government as well as the private is functioning.
During our talks, you discussed that there was certain under-reporting done by telecom companies. As you were also in Department of Telecom as member finance, so were you able to recover those under-reported revenues from telecom companies under the existing mechanisms?
We have raised the demands. After looking at going through the books of accounts, after that special audit had been conducted, they have all gone to the courts. So the matter presently is sub judice.
There are certain limitations of CAG also because there is a caveat. The order does not allow them to look into the expenditure part of the telecom companies. They will only be able to look at revenues. Thank you.
You are listening to a dialogue on CAG Audit to private telecom companies. The participants were Sadhna Dikshit, former member Telecom Commission, and Prasoon Srivastava, Special Telecom Correspondent, PTI. It came to you in the program News Analysis, produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website, news on air.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.